How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great episode today. We are going to discuss the latest Netflix series on, well, it's actually the only Netflix series so far, on the Vicky White, Casey White love story behind bars. I got a chance to see that Netflix special. I actually enjoyed it, but I was wondering if I could, maybe give you guys some insight from the sheriff who worked at that facility when this case happened. He's also the author of a great book related to the Casey White, Vicky White love story. It also goes right into the manhunt as well. His name is Sheriff Rick Singleton. I will have him on very shortly. But guys, again, I'm trying to bring to you guys some true crime, but also in this case here, there's going to be a lot of correctional knowledge being provided. So whether you're just following for true crime or you're following it just to get some lessons of maybe what not to do when working in a jail or in a prison, this would definitely be a good show for you guys to watch. So let me go ahead and get the sheriff. What's up, sir?
Hey, good to see you, Anthony.
The pleasure is mine. Guys, in case you don't know, I did a show with Rick not too long ago when he promoted his book. And guys, I got a chance to read the book. I find the book to be a phenomenal book, very fact-driven, tells the story right from the beginning to the end, right through to the manhunt. So if you guys get a chance, you definitely want to get that book, and I'm sure Rick is going to promote it. Hey, Rick, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Rick Singleton. I'm former sheriff, retired sheriff of Lauderdale County, Alabama. I retired in January of 23. And spent a 46-year career in law enforcement. I started the sheriff's office, worked there about 5 years, went to the Florence Police Department in Florence, Alabama, worked my way up through the rank to chief, and I was chief of police in Florence for a little over 16 years. Retired, and I'd always aspired to be sheriff, but I had actually ran twice and wasn't elected. The first time I was just 26 years old, like I thought I was qualified. But anyway, I really had lost that interest. And then after I retired from the police department, people started approaching me, asking me to run for sheriff again. And I let them talk me into it. So I spent 2 terms as sheriff. And in the last few months of my tenure there is when Vicky let Casey White out of the jail. And so the rest is history, as they say, I guess.
Well, hey, Sheriff, can I see the book that you wrote, please?
Sure. It's available on Amazon, or you can order it from your favorite bookstore. It's available in any bookstore, or as I said, you can order it through Amazon. It's just it's sort of broken down into 3 parts. The first section of the book is basically the background of Vicky and Casey and the murder that Casey was actually confessed to that got him to the Lauderdale County Jail to start with. And then I talk about his, trips to the Lauderdale County Jail and what happened. He was actually in our jail 3 times. It was the 3rd time that he was there when he and Vicky left. And then the final part of the book is just some of my thoughts and insight on what it was like as sheriff having to deal with that situation. Of course, as you know, it got international media attention. It dominated the media for about 11 days back in 2022, the first week of May when they left, but we're on the run.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that it's been 3 years. I remember doing a couple of segments with News Nation because a big part of this, if you guys aren't familiar with Vicky White, Casey White, basically Vicky White was a high-ranking jail official who helped inmate Casey White escape from the jail. They were on the run for a bit, but it was also a love story. And what makes this a complicated story is, especially after now watching the Netflix special, there's Vicky, the position, what position she was in as a high-level jail official, but then there's also Vicky, the person who was very loved. So I think that the jail or the personnel within the jail was very conflicted because they had such a love for who Vicky was. And you can even see in the Netflix special that even after the course of what happened and what she did, the people are still emotional and not so much about that they feel that they were betrayed, just emotional that she passed, that she took her own life. And I just felt that the Netflix special, but also your book as well, painted such a unique picture for me because, a lot of us, we focus on the position. And, if you betray us, and you cross the line with an inmate, it's unforgivable. But then there's the point where there's the person you knew that you grew and loved, a person that was there for you when you needed them, which Vicky was for a lot of the staff there. So now there's the conflict of the position and the person, and the person won on this. I think at the very end, when you watch the Netflix special, they just loved Vicky. And again, regardless of what led to that point, there was such a love for her, regardless of her actions. But I got to ask you right off the bat, before we get into questions, you saw the Netflix special. You are probably the one that has the most insight on everything that happened. Do you think that it was a fair perspective? I mean, what were your thoughts?
I thought they did a really good job with it as far as presenting the facts. They just sort of told it like it was. And, you're absolutely right. We had known and worked with Vicky for several years. And, as I said, when this event was happening, when I approached the media and they were questioning me about Vicky, I said repeatedly, this is not the Vicky we know. And it wasn't. We just never would have thought in a million years that Vicky White, of all people, would have pulled a stunt like this. I mean, she was respected and loved by all her co-workers and the entire courthouse, the judges, the district attorney's office. She was just a super nice person and did an excellent job. I mean, she was very dependable, and it just really knocked us all for a loop when this happened.
Yeah, and that's why, I have my books out on manipulation, because I believe, yes, obviously in order to be manipulated, you have to be a willing party. I get it. But I think a lot of people don't realize how these inmates, they target certain vulnerabilities, and, there's a game for everyone. I'm actually writing another book right now on manipulation, and it's going to really cover a lot of kind of tactics that are employed, but it's lessons I learned from the prison that I want to give to the outside world, because technically we know how they think because we work amongst them. We're the ones that tell the inmates no. And therefore, once we tell them no, they start to reveal who they are. They start to the mask comes off in an effort to get what they want when they can't get what they want. But when we went back and, I remember seeing this video and I was watching it with Russ, people that follow the channel, Russ co-hosts with me. We watched it and we knew something was unique because at the very beginning, when they said that, they thought that she was kidnapped, because there was a bit of a story at the beginning that she was kidnapped. If you work in the corrections profession, the first thing we were thinking was, why is a woman taking this guy out by herself? What's going on? And then it slowly shifted from like, I don't think she was kidnapped, because she was in a position to plan the transport, to go out alone. So we started thinking ahead of time that this could have been a planned escape, and it was hard to stomach. But I had to be definitely harder for you guys than it was for us from a distance. But what's your thoughts?
It was absolutely, difficult for us to accept the fact that she voluntarily participated in this. And you're right, as far as the manipulation. I mean, if Vicky White could be manipulated, she was the assistant director. And, and we may get into it a little later, but really a lot of the responsibility is on my shoulders for putting her in a position and giving her too much authority and control, investing too much authority and control in a single person when it came to the transports of inmates. And that was on me because it was part of our policies. Of course, we amended our policies over the time that Casey was in and out of jail. And, back to Casey. Now, Casey, we talked about a love story. There's no question in my mind that Vicky White loved Casey White. She absolutely fell in love with him. She'd been married and divorced. She had gotten engaged a second time. Her fiance was killed in a car accident before they were married. And she sort of swore off men at that point. She just felt like, that it just wasn't in the cards for her to be married. And Casey White, his first trip to our facility in the summer of late summer of 2020. He came to our jail with escape on his mind. We found out through an informant that he was planning an escape then, and his plan was to take a corrections officer hostage using a shank, a prison knife, and getting out of the facility that way. We confirmed that information we gotten. We found the shanks in his cell. We shipped him straight back to Donaldson Prison at that point, and we changed our policies because up until that point, correction deputies were transporting all inmates. But we got to looking at that thing, and boy, we came close to something like this happening. We really need sworn deputies transporting violent inmates. So we changed our policy where sworn deputies had to transport anyone charged with murder or any other violent crime, rape, assault, felony assault, whatever. Had to be 2 sworn deputies. And, of course, as assistant director, Vicky was very well aware of that policy change, and it was her job to implement it, which she did, up until April the 29th of 2022. But he came to our facility in the summer of 2020 with escape on his mind. So I think, looking at it, I think your background's in corrections. You know how those guys operate. They size different people up, and I think he saw Vicky and saw that she was vulnerable and had a weak spot, and he moved in on it, full steam ahead, and convinced her that he loved her and all this kind of stuff. When he left in 2020 and went back to Donaldson Prison, Vicky and he began to have contact in that first break between his first and second visit to our jail. They made some phone calls to each other. So he made his move that first trip. He came back to our facility the following summer, in the summer of 21, and late fall, and no issue, no problems. He didn't try to escape or anything else. And then when he went back to Donaldson on that trip, he and Vicky conversed by phone almost 1,000 times in a 6-month period. I did the math. It averaged about 4 phone calls a day during the time that he was back in Donaldson. Then he came back to our facility in February of 22, and of course they left April the 29th. So, I think he sized her up, saw she was vulnerable. He moved in, made his move, and he persuaded her that he was in love with her, and she fell in love with him, and the rest is history.
I want to back up something on something you said when you said that you, to some extent, you said you may have messed up because you gave her all this power or something. So I'm going to disagree, if I may, out of respect, though, is because that's a person in a high level position. So the moment you give that person a position, I trust the person in the position first. So I trust the position and then the person. And then the thing is for me, distrust is earned. When you're managing a prison, managing a jail, you got to give trust. You got to empower your people because there's so many things running around at once that if you're going to make an effort to micromanage, then why do you even have those people in those positions? So I believe first for me, the position, when the person gets put in the position, first I look at the position. That's a position that's next to me. I trust the position. Then I develop a relationship with the person. And to be honest with you, the scariest thing here is when a inmate decides to manipulate. They are going to try to manipulate the highest level of authority because of what's underneath that they can control. So with that said, I mean, there's at one point where you got Casey, who definitely is the manipulator, and he manipulates her. But then you also, to some extent, have Vicky, who's also a manipulator. I'm not being rude, but it's the truth, because in her position, the things that she was able to do, get access to, and maybe even some of the trust that was earned, from that closeness that was developed after she got the position, she was already entangled.
Well, you're right, and I mean, as you said, I mean, you can't have someone in a position like that you don't trust. You'd be foolish to put someone in a position like that if you didn't trust them to start with. And that was, Vicky. We all trusted her, and then, as you said, she actually manipulated us because she was doing this behind our back, and she did it well. I mean, she was good at it because none of us had a clue. Matter of fact, in the documentary, you probably picked up on it. They play some of the phone calls between the two, and Casey had made some kind of comment like, "I can't wait to see Alabama in my rearview mirror," or something like that. And she sort of chastised him. "Don't say that kind of thing. All this is recorded. I know about all this stuff. They got GPS on the cars. They got this. They got that. Nobody knows anything unless you tell them." So, so she was, you're right. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I never thought about that, but yeah, absolutely. She manipulated us.
Yeah, because as I said, I mean, if I'm an inmate, I may try to manipulate the officer that are closest to me, but if I can get a sergeant, I'll get a sergeant, because then I get the sergeant, whoever they control. But man, if I could get a lieutenant, I'm going to get a lieutenant. And that's why we always tell people, like, the higher up you go, you want to be approachable, but not so easily accessible, because if you get caught up, the vulnerability that you could leave the facility in, because now you are in control of the people that are in control of the people who are in control of the inmates. So for me, if I see high-level staff interacting with inmates a little bit more than they should, I may go back and say, "Hey, listen, you got to let the officers do that job, or bring it down to a lieutenant, but you got to keep yourself here," because at the end of the day, I think in some cases there is a universal precaution. I get it, but in some cases you got to protect your higher staff. I'm not saying they can't engage. Of course they can engage, universal precaution. But what happens is frequency. Eventually, just through human behavior, the guards, the walls could drop a little bit, and these inmates are expert manipulators. So my big thing would be is you don't need access with that person every day. If you have a concern, you could, go ahead and drop it through the chain of command and, go ahead, because if by chance, hypothetically, they wind up starting to kind of manipulate an officer, I got a sergeant that can get on top of that immediately, correct the officer, do what they got to do. But when you get it at the highest level, I mean, who's going to correct her? You? That you're too high up.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem, and there are a lot of factors that play into that. The turnover rate. As you know, the turnover rate is tremendous. And another challenge in a smaller jail is the staff. You got staff shortages, and sometimes those higher ranking officials have to get in there and do part of the work. The day Vicky left, we only had 5 corrections officers inside the jail. We had 4 doing transports already. That only left 5 corrections officers inside the jail, and that included Vicky. So sometimes in a smaller facility, you don't have the option of isolating the administrators like they should be. They have to roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty just like everybody else sometimes. And that's a challenge for the smaller facilities, is keeping those administrators, in their role and limiting that interaction. But, it just, like I said, I think in one chapter of my book, it's like a perfect storm. I mean, just all these factors came together, shorthanded, new officers on the job. The officer that brought Casey up to the front had just been working 2 months. He hadn't been fully trained. He certainly wasn't going to question the assistant director, and so it just, all these things came together and put Vicky in a position where she could pull this off. It would have been hard for any other officer to pull it off, but if it'd been a sergeant checking him out to carry him out, probably the sergeant would have been questioned about that. But they're not going to question the assistant administrator, especially when they hadn't had that much time on the job.
And what's great about what you're saying is expert manipulators. It's not just about the person; it's the opportunity, the situation. So, I mean, they could look at the environment and say, well, you know what? Not only is this person vulnerable, and I can get to her, but the environment's not going to stop me. There's no counter influence. So, I mean, that's another thing for the expert to play their game. It's not just always looking at the weakness that Ganji has, or in this case, Vicky has. But if I decide to invest in this, is there going to be any counter influence to that? And no, like you said, you got staff that, are new. They're not going to question her position. And I think that was a great perspective. She has to come around more, because right now we're so low staff. So now I get to see her frequently. And what shocked me, when I watched the special, there's a couple of things and that I thought was unique. So one is they try to say that this relationship started because he kind of rolled the dice real quick and complimented her on her her ass. He complimented her on her ass, and that she basically kind of didn't can't do that. It's unacceptable. Maybe go to make an effort to rent. It's kind of like she slowly accepted that, and they marked that in the special as that's what kind of started it off. And then they also show in one of her phone calls, which I found was very unique. And I don't know if Casey knew this, because remember, guys, they observe people, but he took them real quick. An inmate takes a shot, and I mean it's a roll of the dice, but it's a very calculated roll of the dice when to go ahead and flatter someone on their physical appearance, a staff member. Now, granted, they can kind of flatter on anything. Usually, they could start with something more simple as their work ethic or their character or their values, which is very hard for us to say that's inappropriate. But when they cross that line and they flatter about physical appearance, we're usually quick to say that's unacceptable, and it's unacceptable because you don't tolerate it, not because it's the rules, not because you're an officer and they're an inmate, because in their mind, if those things didn't exist, then we could be together. No, it's I don't accept that. But then to see that she did accept it, and then there's a phone call that they have where she mentions that she had a dream of being a stripper. Now, whether that is something she says in the moment or something that she maybe really did have a dream of, now that Casey saw something in her. Casey saw a woman that maybe for some reason wanted attention, wanted some level of attention. And maybe it could have been how she acted around all the male inmates. Maybe there was something there that he saw that he decided, I'm going to go ahead and roll the dice. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. She, Vicky was, I think, starving for attention. She'd been single for several years and hadn't dated in a number of years. I think when he paid her some attention to her physical appearance, I think that he just hit the right spot, and I think he figured that out pretty quick and moved in on it.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you something, guys. This is the part of the videos that I like. This to me, don't get me wrong. Obviously, the manhunt definitely something that you can learn from. You want to watch, but me, I was very focused on the building of the relationship, and then sadly, when it gets to the manhunt, I want the guy caught. Don't get me wrong, but I just really love focusing on the relationship and how the dynamic grows. And I wanted to ask something. So I do agree with you. I think there could have been some level of attention. He knew it. I mean, again, her husband had just passed. She was single. And I don't know if it was something said or, maybe how she reacted. I mean, these guys are expert manipulators. I mean, they see things that we don't normally see. And it's a tremendous roll of the dice, but again, very strategic. And the fact that she didn't react, or even if she, or basically, even if she didn't react, that's still not good. Basically, you have to make sure that the inmate knows that the behavior is not tolerated. That means you can't accept the compliment. You can't ignore the compliment. So the fact that she didn't do any of those two things means, okay, now we could start the game a little bit more. And then obviously it progresses into what will be phone calls later and ultimately the escape. And by the way, guys, for people on the outside, once the first rule is broken, now we're not talking about little nuisance things. We're talking about once the nuisance things create to a rule that's actually been broken, now you got the leverage. So now you figure, well, wait a second. Someone like Vicky, if he's now got leverage, now he's asking for an escape. This is where it tends to be, where staff may find this to be her actions a bit unforgivable, would be this part here, I think.
Yeah.
We know that you can get manipulated, and we know we're all human, but we know at one point you're going to be asked for something that you know that you cannot do that puts others at risk. And at that point, when you decide to cross the line, that's where it becomes unforgivable, because now your problems have become everyone else's concerns. But usually what happens here is that when someone decides to play a game and they decide to let's say the officer or whoever the staff member says, oh, you know what, this is maybe getting a bit too far. And the inmate says, well, I want you to do this. Now I'm not going to do this. He goes, well, if you don't do this, I'm going to turn you in for A, B, C, and D. Now the staff now has to look into themselves. Are you going to do the right thing, or are you going to cover your own ass? And, most staff, unfortunately, with the pressure of getting in trouble, whatever the leverage is, they wind up trying to cover their own ass and then unfortunately doing foolish shit. There was no leverage here. There was no threat from Casey. There was nothing. It was just, are we going to do this? Which makes me believe that there was always going to be this developed relationship and then the partnership to ride off into the sunset without no threat, without no coercion. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, we found out later that they had physical contact inside the jail. And I'm not sure even to this day if that was on the second visit to the jail or if it was on the last one when they actually left. But I'm pretty sure it was going to be on the second one because in some of their phone conversations, then that's another one they played in the documentary. Where she made some comment about it was better than last time or something like that. So I'm not sure exactly when all that transpired, even to this day. But there's no question they had some physical contact at some point when he was in the jail.
Well, let me ask if we can go back. So I think, so I know a lot of inmates because they're one of the people on the show is a former inmate, and they talk about, wow, she was a real nice woman. She cared for the inmates. And here's the neat thing about that. When I get it from an inmate is I would like to ask them, how do you define care? I'm just curious because for me, I define caring for the inmates a bit different than you may define it. I don't know. So I would be a little bit more, if I was doing the show, I would ask, well, can you explain what care is? I'm very curious because what makes her different than the other officers, because that could be the slight bending of the rules, the breaking of the rules, and inmates can interpret that as, wow, she really cares. Well, hold on, because that's not where we're going to kind of balance care out for us. But when she started making the phone calls, was that, well, two questions here, sir. When she started making the phone calls, was that the first rule that she broke? And if not, was there other things that she did that would be considered not an extension of the rules, but more rule violations?
Well, I don't think the phone calls were the first. I think she began violating the rules on his first visit there because she'd established some sort of relationship with him on that first visit. And you know yourself, I mean, that's just something you do not do. You don't establish a relationship with inmates.
Right.
And how that relationship developed, I'm not sure. We know they passed some notes eventually, and and then as I said, he was complimenting her every way she turned, and so she definitely violated some rules even that first visit up there that he had, and it continued to throughout that 2 year or year and a half period from the summer of 20 to summer of 22. So about almost 2 years they had this relationship developed over that course of that 2 years. It really intensified in the last 7 or 8 months. After he went back to Donaldson in the fall of 21, between then and the time he came back in February of 22, that relationship really intensified.
Yeah, and then I'm thinking if obviously the inmates, because it looks like when we watched the show that the inmates were aware, or at least this one person was aware. So you figure once they're made aware, now don't get me wrong, Casey's a bigger dude, so he can intimidate other inmates if they decide to try to turn him in or something. But not every inmate, but there are inmates that I'm sure he could intimidate. But the biggest concern is when you have a corrupt staff, in order for them to maintain that secret relationship, how do they make sure the other inmates benefit from it? I mean, were there any concerns with her and the other inmates in order to keep them keep their mouth shut?
Well, I don't know about her. There definitely was with Casey. There again, part of the documentary some of the recorded conversations that they had was one of the former inmates that was in the cell with Casey had basically tried to extort him or blackmail him because he had contacted Vicky or sent her a note, I think, that Casey owed him some money, and if he didn't pay up, he was going to basically rat him out. And, there's a phone call between Vicky and Casey where she's discussing that, and she's fairly upset with him about that, and tells him to take care of it, to pay the men the money, and, because I think she was concerned that they were about to be found out.
And then it's funny because I usually see when you get a staff member caught up with an inmate, I actually usually see it going the opposite way, where the inmates wind up going to the staff member and saying, I know you're caught up, so this is what you're going to do for us too. Because obviously that inmate can only have so much power. So at one point, the inmates will try to get to the staff member, get a little extra benefit. Because remember, guys, from the outside looking in, if you got a staff member under your control, especially a high-level staff member like that, you are a powerful individual. And some inmates, they don't want you to have that type of power. So there's many reasons why they may want to try to mess with that dynamic or benefit from it to balance things out. And I'm thinking, when you watched the Netflix special, was that the first time you heard the recorded dialogue or the recorded phone calls?
It was. During the course of the investigation, I didn't listen to the phone call, so that was the first time I'd personally heard any of the phone calls. I'd been told about some of the context of the calls, but that's the first time I actually heard them.
Now, if it's the first time you heard it, and in your mind, you still got Vicky the way you are, so you're still shocked, by the way, because all you know at this point here is that she helped an escape, okay, but you don't know the depth of it. There's still, maybe some conflict in your mind. Maybe he did coerce her, whatever it is, but then all of a sudden you hear the phone calls. You see this dynamic. You see that there is a relationship where there's an even exchange of love and words anyway, and then sexual dialogue as well. How does that make you now reevaluate how you see Vicky and just the situation in general?
Well, it's difficult having been a friend for so many years and having an exemplary record up until this event happened. It's still hard for me to, blame Vicky, I guess, for lack of a better word. I mean, I see Vicky as much as a victim as I do a perpetrator. I mean, she just, she would not have tolerated this kind of conduct on any of her subordinates. And, for her to get engaged in it, it just, he got in her head. There's no question about it. And as you said, the master manipulator, and he got in her head and wooed her, and to the point that she risked everything for him. So, I know that's why I said earlier, there's no question in my mind, she loved him. Why else would someone do this and put their whole life at risk, literally put their life on the line to help somebody like that, if it wasn't for love? I mean, it's either love or coercion, and we know it wasn't coercion now, so it had to be, she had to love him.
Yeah, and then as I said, I mean, if he's able to control her, then through her, he can control most of the facility, technically, because of her level. And what's funny, at the very end, when I was watching the documentary, now, guys, I just like to be objective, but I observe people. It's what I do too. I find this very interesting. I got a degree in psychology as well. I love social psych, especially. But after she died in the vehicle, and they're putting his handcuffs on, or they're getting him. He says, "My wife," and I found that to be very unique, because to me that's a sense of ownership. Like I maybe I don't know. Maybe he did have feelings for her. I don't know. But he said, "My wife," and I thought that was unique, because if he had did something to her, sometimes the verbiage would be a little bit more distant. Like, how is she doing? She shot herself. But he said, "How is my wife?" That means he took ownership of whatever that relationship was, and there was no need to separate. There was no dynamic that would make him want to kind of remove some level of ownership to that relationship. So I don't know. I said, I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. That's not an effort to minimize, because you're probably 100%. Maybe there is no care. Maybe this was nothing but a game for him to get the escape. And I believe obviously that probably is. But the fact that he chose the word "my wife" or the phrase "my wife," I was thinking, wow, maybe for him, there was a level of a stronger connection than most of us would think. But again, I mean, is he able to love? I mean, we don't know. I'm not going to go ahead and project what I feel and think that he sees things the same way. I just found that him saying the word "my wife" after what had happened was really connecting himself to her at that moment that would have been unplanned. What's your thoughts?
You know, there again, some of the conversations, you know, they talked about getting away and getting married at some point in time, and you know, those sort of things. But you know, I still, I'm personally still convinced that he just used her. Within a week after getting back to Donaldson after her death, he had 4 or 5 women that he was talking to on a regular basis in the prison, and he had women across the country put over $5,000 on his commissary account. Ooh. And you know, I mean, he was taking it all in, you know, and I think if I love my wife, and I would never put her in a position where I thought she could be harmed. You know, if I was going to do something, I'd do it on my own. I wouldn't drag her into it if I loved her. That's the way I look at it. But you know, people love differently. So you know, he says he loved her. He ain't convinced me he did.
Yeah. And Sheriff, you know what? I have to agree with that. Was where my conflict is too. I agree with you 100%. Then the other aspect of that would be, well, if you did and you really cared, why would you go ahead and want to do this? And the funny thing is, you know what my response to that was? Technically, maybe he thought the gift was for her.
Yeah.
You know, as crazy it may sound, but again, you know, manipulators, guys, you just don't know. But most manipulators, guys, they don't have that sense of empathy. They don't have that sense of remorse. So for them, it's all a game. I just felt that word, that when he said "my wife," yeah, it just kind of changed a bit of a dynamic for me. But again, I wish we could have saw his emotion, but it doesn't. They're tucking him into the vehicle, so you can't see his face. I mean, this is the guy that's used to getting arrested, so I think you can kind of assume that whatever emotions were there could have been related to the uniqueness of this arrest, where he had someone that maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I thought it'd be just a unique perspective. The audience we have here kind of likes to look at all roads. Hey, Sheriff, let me ask a question. So since the phone calls get recorded, do they ever check the phone calls before, you know, I mean, obviously he did escape, but was anybody listening to the phone calls? Could anybody have identified that this was Vicky making calls to him before all this happened?
Well, I don't think anyone in the state prison would have recognized her voice, you know, if he had heard them, and the recordings came from the state prison. So, you know, I doubt it. And, you know, Donaldson has over 800 inmates, and they're all making phone calls, you know. So to sit down and you know yourself, that's your background. You can't sit down and listen to every single phone call. I like the new technology they got that will pick up on keywords or phrases. You know, if an inmate's having a conversation that says "meet me," then, you know, to flag it and let you know that you need to listen to this call. What are he talking about? Meet me where? You know, is he talking about meet me on the other side of the pearly gates, or is he talking about meet me down here on the corner from the prison? So yeah, that would help a lot in situations like this, that kind of technology. And you know, unfortunately, in government, as you know well aware, sometimes you know, we're on the tail end of implementing technologies available to us, because usually it's pretty expensive, and you know, they want to control those dollars. So sometimes it's hard to get the kind of equipment that's available to us to hopefully prevent something like this. Then when it happens, then they want to throw all the money they can to try to keep it from happening again. But you know, the other thing about their relationship, and I may be in the head of you, or you can cut me off and we'll come back to it later. But
no, please do, sir. What do you have?
This is something I didn't pick up on until I saw the documentary. You know, it's back to that 911 call when they were being pursued. You know, I said Vicky the comments she was making didn't seem to me like someone who was suicidal. You know, she was talking about, let's get out and run. You know, the airbags are going to go off and kill us. We should have never left the hotel. Those kinds of things. But there's one comment I never heard. I didn't pick up on it because they cleaned the tapes up and you could understand them a little better in the documentary. But I never heard that last comment that she made. The last word out of her mouth before the gunshot was Casey. And the tone of voice and the way she said that wasn't, to me, didn't come across as a sort of a love, Casey, I'm fixing to leave here. It came across that she was aggravated. And what I'm thinking happened, I don't think it was a suicide. I do not believe it was suicide. I believe it was an accidental shooting. And the reason I say that is because the marshals had rammed that car, but it didn't push it in the ditch the first round. Casey, according to the marshal's statements, was getting out of the car when he saw the second vehicle headed directly for him. And he jumped back in the car. The second truck hit it, rammed it, and pushed it over in the ditch on the passenger side. They hit it on the driver's side. Casey was in the driver's seat. So Casey's back in the car, and he's not buckled up. So where is he at now when the car goes over in the ditch? He's laying on top of Vicky, and he's trying to get up. And the way she comes across, and go back and listen to it again, Casey, like, what are you doing? You're all over me. And I think he stepped on her, or somehow, I don't think he stepped on her. I think it happened before he even got on his feet, because the bullet grazed him across the back of the neck. And I also saw, for the first time, the body cam footage from the emergency room where he was complaining with his ear ringing. He couldn't hear out of his ear, which implies that the gun was just basically in close proximity to his head when it went off. So I think he was scrambling around trying to get up, and in the process, actually, hit her, and she had her finger on the trigger, and the gun went off.
Now, was that when you heard this, was that your first impression accidental, or did you think that it was purposeful?
I thought, knowing Vicky and listening to the rest of the 911 tapes, I felt from day one it was accidental. But that just reaffirmed when I heard that last word that came over her lips, Casey. And the tone, the way she said it, it sounds like, if somebody's pestering you or something and you wanting to get them off of you, right. Anthony, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it wasn't like a scream. It was more of, get the hell off me.
More like an aggravation.
Did you? I know, like, there are some people that obviously think that he could have also killed. I mean, you don't know what happened, right? But no. Do you think he was capable of killing her, though? If after this happened,
capable of it. I don't think he did.
Okay.
I think like I said, I think it's accidental because the bullet grazed him across the back of the neck. The bullet went in here and came out the back top of the head. So the trajectory of the bullet, with the comments during the 911 call, let's run, we should have never left, all this. And then when I watched the documentary here, this last word, Casey, it just, to me, it just adds up to being accidental.
Yeah, and that's great, because that gives me another reason now to want to rewatch this documentary. Yeah, so I have a couple of reasons why I definitely want to revisit this documentary. I actually want to go revisit the documentary to kind of re-listen to some of the phone calls again, because I think the phone calls do document, like, basically the evolution of the relationship. And you know what I just caught from you that I didn't know? I must have missed it, guys, so forgive me. I didn't know the phone calls were being made from Donaldson. So did the phone calls stop when he went back to the county?
Yes, but to my knowledge, there were no recorded phone calls on our system.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't know that. That's good to know.
But if there had been, well, we would have known it after the fact. But, Vicky, she was the one that monitored those on the inmates. I mean, that was part of her responsibility. But, I mean, we would have found them late, after the fact. And to my knowledge, there were none made on our system.
Yeah, I think that was good to know, because again, when I was watching it, the first thing in my head is like, well, how could they let all these phone calls happen? But you cleared it up. It's like, well, if they were made in Donaldson, they don't know who Vicky is. I mean, they have no idea. And you know, and again, as you said, there was no phone calls being made at the jail, to your knowledge. So, guys, for those that had asked me that question, and are you checking the recordings? I mean, that makes perfect sense. If it was at Donaldson, who's Vicky? You know, we don't know who she is. Hey,
And I don't think she went by her name either when they called.
Oh, in the when she's making the phone calls. Hey, you wrote such a thorough and complete book. I'm a very big fan. I actually, when we did our show the first time, I actually read your book immediately once you sent it me. Once you sent it to me, nicely autographed. So I'm lucky. It's in here, right here. I read it. I personally couldn't put it down. I was extremely fascinated. I love how you were just so detailed. The vulnerability in what you wrote, because you're the leader of this ship and you embraced everything. You took onus, you took responsibility. And for me, that's what a good leader does. I mean, again, I can't control her actions, but having said that, I'm not going to hide from that either, you know, and I'm going to go ahead and step up. And I think that's why whatever changes will eventually happen in that jail, or whatever changes you started, are sincere changes from the heart, because you're not there worried about a political cut. No, what happened here? What's wrong? Even if tell me, and we'll fix it from where it needs to be fixed. And when you look at your book and then you look at the Netflix special, is there anything that you would maybe, if you had to write another book, something worth revisiting?
I don't think so. You know, I'm a history buff. I like history, and this obviously is a very historically significant event in law enforcement, criminal justice here in our county. I compare it to another incident that happened right after the Civil War in the 1860s, early 1870s. We had a notorious outlaw around here named Tom Clark, and Marshal Blair, who was the town marshal in Florence, found Tom Clark. He'd murdered 19 people, and they were breaking into houses and stealing and stuff. Marshal Blair somehow found out that Tom Clark was down in Gravelly Springs, a little community just west of Florence, about 15 miles, and he rounded up a posse. They went in there and caught him. The townspeople broke him out of jail that night by force. There was a little bit of a gunfight between the citizens and the jailer. They actually ended up getting into the jail, and they broke Tom Clark and his two companions out and lynched them 2 blocks up the street, hung them from a tree. And the one brag that Tom Clark allegedly had made was that nobody would ever run over him. And so the legend is that the townspeople buried him under the main street in town, one of the 2 main streets, right by the cemetery, so that every day thousands of people run over him. Now, we don't know if that's true or not. If it's just legend or if it's fact, we don't really know. I wish Marshal Blair had written a book so that we would have the facts and the details, and that's what motivated me to write this book. It's really, I said it's really nothing more than a really long police report. So, you know, I just wanted to document it for future generations. If you know, we talk about Tom Clark to this day, that was 150 years ago. Well, 50 years or 100 years from now, they're talking about the Vicky and Casey White escape. I want them to have a resource they can go back. Well, here's what the sheriff said happened. You know, so they got a detailed account of what those 11 days were like.
Well, the moment I read that first sentence, I know that book was written with integrity. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just didn't feel it was a book with, it wasn't excuses, it was reason. And this is what we're going to do next. And I think for anybody, if you just kind of, even if you may not be interested in the incident itself, it's a great book of a leader who takes responsibility and winds up, you know, really providing a true history or true account of facts that I think most of us should really try to do ourselves when we're telling a story, you know. And then again, I enjoyed it. Hey, Sheriff, anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, just I appreciate the invitation to come on your show again. You know, it's a very interesting story. You know, of course, it happened in the twilight of my career. You know, I guess I went out with a bang, as I say. But you know, it's a very sad story, and that's the comment I've heard from most people who've watched the documentary, especially those around here who knew Vicky, that it was very sad to watch and see how this thing played out.
Hey, Sheriff, let me ask one more question, being that you just reminded me when you said that. The unique thing about this situation was, I know we have people that get caught up all the time, sadly, and they wind up getting escorted out. And some of us feel angry, if we don't really know the person, but we feel betrayed if we do. And I think those are two different type of feelings that we have to work on in a different manner. I think your facility felt more betrayed because they loved her. And you could definitely see it in the video that they're heartbroken. It's like there's really no judgment on her because ultimately she did take her own life. So no one's gonna sit there at this point and say, "Guys, she's passed, she's done." And how do you rebuild from this? This isn't a simple thing to rebuild from because of how affected your staff was. I mean, this wasn't just any officer who messed with an inmate. This was a leader, someone they respected, someone she had she impacted many people. So how do you rebuild after this to make sure that your staff is okay to move forward? What did you guys do?
Well, we offered counselors to come in and speak to any employees who wanted it, and I think a few of them took advantage of that. And it's a mixed bag as far as emotions from the staff. Some of them were very angry at her, and others were just felt, as you said, felt totally betrayed. I'm probably one of the latter group. I was angry at her, and still, and to a degree, I really wish she obviously had not done this. And there's no reason she should have, but at the end of the day, I knew her for 8 years. I didn't know her for 11 days. And, I know what she did those other 11 years, the rest of that time that I knew her, and I knew the good things that she'd done, not just for the facility, for the department, but she literally changed some lives. And, that's a lot of people in corrections. I mean, they think they're going to go in there and change everybody, and you and I both know that it's just not going to happen. But if one inmate turns their life around and becomes a productive citizen because of something you've done, or I've done, or Vicky did, then it's one life saved. So
did she have a service, and did staff attend?
They did. Some of the staff attended, and they, of course, asked me if they could, and I said absolutely. And they asked me, could they wear their uniforms? I said absolutely. I did not personally attend because I had been the face of that whole manhunt, and some things that were that I had to say, and some of those things I just didn't know how the family would take my being there. So I just sent my condolences via one of our deputies who was close to the family, and told them I didn't want to be there to be a distraction or to interrupt her memorial service. So but yeah, it was very I wouldn't wish that on any sheriff, chief of police, anybody else. When someone that and love in one sense of the word, and trust, and then to be betrayed like that, it's just not something I would wish on anyone.
When you guys finally put her to rest, do you think the staff that attended, it was more about Vicky and not so much the position? Even though they wore their uniform, the impact she had on them was because they wore that uniform.
Yeah. And there were several former inmates were there too at the funeral. I mean, she was the county jails, as you know, are different from the prisons. You have people in and out. You have your regular town drunks that are in there every weekend, and those kind of things. And it's a little different atmosphere than the prisons. And she was like a mother figure to a lot of those younger inmates. One of the guys, I think, the documentary made the comment she was the mother he never had. Because she would take a genuine interest in them, trying to help them make better choices. And, in the end, it cost her life.
If this didn't happen, one last question, I'm sorry. If this didn't happen and, this escape didn't happen, where would have her career led her? Would she have been retired? Would she have been even in a chance for a sheriff's spot, or?
Well, a matter of fact, and this is something else that I commented to someone the other day that it has not been really made public. The first time, to my knowledge, it's the first time it's been said publicly. But the director, Jason Butler, and I had discussions. He eligible to retire here in a year or so. Vicky had a little time left, and we had talked about the fact that Vicky would probably be the obvious successor for his job because of her knowledge of the facility and things like that. And that's never been said publicly before, to my knowledge. I haven't said it before publicly.
Doesn't that make it more heart-wrenching?
Have a conversation. I'm sorry.
That makes it more heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
So. Hey, can I see your book one more time?
Yeah, sure. Manhunt, The Search for Vicky and Casey White. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And, you know, that comes from my media policy. I met with the national media when they came into town. The first press conference I had when the national media was there, before we began the press conference, I told them what my media policy was. And I said, it's been this way with our local media my entire career as chief of police and sheriff, and I'm not changing it now just because some of the national media are here. I said, unless there's a legal or investigative reason I can't give you the information, it's all on the table, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you ask a question and if there's no legal or investigative reason I can't answer it, then I'll do my best to answer it. And I just always believed in being transparent. And of course, in this case, we really needed the media's help because they could have been anywhere in the country. It could have even been out of the country by the time we knew that they were even gone.
Yeah, it's just a great read. Guys, if you get a chance, please check out the book. Check out the older episode we did. This is more of just kind of like a wrap up. And I think obviously we're going to have Sheriff Rick Singleton on again just to talk shop. You know, we talk shop all the time. I think it would be just a great opportunity. I can introduce you to the people I work with. A friend of mine right now just got promoted to jail captain at a jail down in Texas. So I'm sure he'll be very open to hear some good advice from a sheriff like yourself. Always a pleasure, sir. I appreciate you, and hopefully we'll get to have you on again. And I know it's kind of last minute. And as always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. Please stay safe.